Eleanor Washington stood frozen in the aisle as champagne dripped from her designer suit, the flight attendant's smirk visible to everyone in first class. What the airline didn't know, this confused old lady controlled billions in aviation investments, and her granddaughter Zara was live streaming everything. Before I dive into this incredible story of discrimination, power, and justice, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe to catch more stories of remarkable people who turned adversity into triumph. Trust me, what happens next will leave you speechless. The crisp April morning found Eleanor Washington, 74, striding confidently through Atlanta International Airport. Her charcoal Armani suit whispered wealth rather than shouted it, much like the woman herself. As the CEO and founder of Washington Enterprises, a multinational conglomerate with holdings across technology, real estate, and transportation, Eleanor had built her empire from the ground up, starting with a single property investment in Tishewu. Born in segregated Tuskegee, Alabama, Eleanor had witnessed the ugliest face of American racism. Her father, a brilliant mathematician, denied university positions taught at the local black high school. Her mother, who could have been a doctor in another life, worked as a midwife. They instilled in her an unshakable belief: excellence was the best revenge against prejudice. "Never let them see you sweat, Ellie," her father would say. "Let your success drown out their noise." And succeed she had. Washington Enterprises now controlled billions in investments with a particular focus on aviation and transportation infrastructure. Eleanor's signature was sought after on contracts worldwide. Her wisdom was courted by presidents and prime ministers. Today's flight from Atlanta to San Francisco would deliver her to the Global Aviation Summit, where she was scheduled to deliver the keynote address. The industry buzzed with rumors that Washington Enterprises was preparing to make a major investment in the sector, possibly even acquiring a controlling stake in one of the major carriers. Walking slightly behind Eleanor, tapping rapidly on her phone, was Zara Washington, 29, her granddaughter, and the company's chief legal officer. Harvard Law Review editor-turned-corporate attorney Zara represented the future of Washington Enterprises. Where Eleanor was measured and strategic, Zara burned with passionate intensity. While Eleanor had built her success by navigating around obstacles, Zara believed in dismantling them entirely. "Grandma, the Sky Globe executives are already in San Francisco," Zara reported, looking up from her device. "Their CEO sent another email asking to schedule private time with you before your keynote." Eleanor's lips curved into a knowing smile. "I bet he did." Sky Globe Airways, their carrier for today's journey, had been courting Washington Enterprises for months. The airline needed capital infusion to fund their fleet modernization program, and Eleanor's investment would be the perfect solution. The airline's leadership had pulled out all stops to ensure today's flight would showcase their premium service. As they approached the first-class check-in, counterheads turned. Eleanor's quiet authority commanded attention without demanding it. The check-in agent's professional smile transformed into genuine warmth as she processed their boarding passes, upgrading them to the airline's exclusive Celestial Suite seats without prompting. "It's an honor to have you flying with us today, Ms. Washington," the agent gushed. "The entire Sky Globe family is delighted to serve you." Eleanor thanked her with practiced grace, accepting the preferential treatment as her due. Not because of entitlement, but because she had earned every ounce of respect through decades of excellence. The pre-boarding process went smoothly. Security staff expedited their screening, lounge attendants fawned appropriately. Everything proceeded exactly as it should for passengers of their stature. Boarding began precisely on schedule. Eleanor and Zara were welcomed aboard, first escorted to their spacious first-class suites by the purser himself. The cabin gleamed with luxury hand-stitched leather seats, polished wood accents, crystal glassware awaiting champagne. Most of first class was filled with white male executives in their 40s and 50s, a demographic Eleanor had grown accustomed to throughout her career. A few nodded in recognition. Eleanor had outlasted, outmaneuvered, and outperformed most of their peers. Flight attendant Melissa Parker appeared at their row as they settled in. 32 years old with pristine blonde hair, pulled into a regulation bun, she wore her sky globe uniform like armor. Her customer service smile didn't quite reach her eyes as she regarded Eleanor. "Can I help you find your seat?" Melissa asked her, tone suggesting she believed Eleanor might be confused. "I'm exactly where I belong," Eleanor replied, evenly handing over her boarding pass. Melissa scanned it, her smile tightening almost imperceptibly. "Of course," she said, returning the pass. "Welcome aboard." She turned immediately to the younger white businessman across the aisle, her demeanor warming considerably. "Mr. Keller, so wonderful to see you again. Can I get your jacket, perhaps some champagne before takeoff?" Eleanor and Zara exchanged a glance, a fleeting communication perfected through years of navigating predominantly white spaces together. No words needed. They both recognized the slight. Eleanor merely raised an eyebrow, silently conveying that she'd cataloged the behavior but deemed it too minor to address. Neither woman could have predicted how this small moment of disregard would cascade into events that would transform an entire industry before the day was done. The champagne was coming, but not in the way anyone expected. The pre-flight bustle filled the cabin as final passengers boarded and flight attendants completed their preparations. Eleanor removed her reading glasses, setting aside the quarterly reports she'd been reviewing. Her carry-on bag remained in the aisle beside her suite, slightly too heavy for her to lift comfortably into the overhead compartment. Most flight attendants would have noticed immediately, offering assistance without prompting. Melissa Parker, however, seemed to develop selective blindness whenever she passed Eleanor's row, despite helping numerous other passengers stow their belongings. "Excuse me," Eleanor finally called, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had commanded boardrooms for decades. "Could I get some assistance with my bag, please?" Melissa glanced over, then gestured vaguely. "I'll be with you in just a moment," she replied, continuing down the aisle to cheerfully help a younger white woman with a much smaller bag. Eleanor's expression remained neutral, decades of practice masking any reaction. Beside her, Zara shifted forward slightly, protective instincts activated. Eleanor placed a restraining hand on her granddaughter's arm. "Not yet." 5 minutes passed. Melissa helped 3 more passengers, all white, all receiving her brightest smile and most attentive service. She passed Eleanor's still waiting bag twice without acknowledgement. Perhaps she didn't see it, Eleanor murmured to Zara, though neither woman believed this. When Melissa next passed, Eleanor spoke more firmly. "Excuse me, I still need assistance with my bag." Melissa stopped, her smile fixed. "Oh, I'm sorry about that. Are you sure you're seated in first class? These suites are quite expensive." The cabin quieted slightly as nearby passengers registered the question. "I'm precisely where my boarding pass indicates," Eleanor replied, her voice level but carrying a hint of steel. "Seat 2, a celestial suite." "It's just that we don't usually see." Melissa caught herself recalibrating. "Let me see your boarding pass again." Eleanor handed it over, maintaining perfect composure despite the growing tension. Melissa examined it with exaggerated care before returning it. "Upgrades, I suppose. We're seeing all sorts these days." Her tone made clear what sorts she meant. Across the aisle, businessman Thomas Reed lowered his financial newspaper, frowning at the exchange. He'd negotiated with Eleanor Washington during his banking career and recognized both her and the disrespect being shown. "My grandmother doesn't need upgrades," Zara interjected coolly. "Washington Enterprises maintains accounts with every major airline. She flies private when commercial service is inadequate." Recognition flickered across Melissa's face, uncertainty followed by recalculation. But rather than adjusting her approach, she doubled down. "Well, even our most experienced travelers sometimes need guidance," she said with artificial sweetness. "First time in Celestial Suite, the overhead compartments can be tricky." She reached for Eleanor's bag with patronizing slowness, as if demonstrating a complex procedure to someone of limited capacity. "I've flown over 4 million miles," Eleanor stated flatly. "I'm familiar with overhead compartments." As Melissa lifted the bag, her grip appeared to slip. The expensive leather carry-on tumbled, catching the edge of a serving tray. A full glass of champagne that had been prepared for another passenger toppled directly onto Eleanor's suit. The golden liquid splashed across her lap and chest, soaking into the fine fabric. Gasps erupted from nearby passengers. The businessman across the aisle half rose from his seat, mouth open in shock. "Oh!" Melissa exclaimed, a hand flying to her mouth. Her expression flickered between surprise and something else, something that looked disturbingly like satisfaction. What an unfortunate accident. Eleanor sat perfectly still, champagne dripping from her suit onto the premium cabin floor. Decades of maintaining composure during business crises served her well in this moment. "Napkins, please," she requested calmly. Melissa handed over a single cocktail napkin entirely inadequate for the spill. "Dark fabrics hide stains anyway," she remarked, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "You'll barely notice it by the time we land." The comment hung in the air, its implications unmistakable. Zara Washington had been raised to navigate white spaces with strategic patience following her grandmother's example. But she was of a different generation, one less willing to absorb indignities silently. With subtle movements, she positioned her phone at an angle, capturing both her grandmother's champagne-soaked suit and Melissa's barely concealed smirk. "I believe this requires more than a cocktail napkin," Thomas Reed spoke up from across the aisle, offering his own unused linen napkin. "Miss Washington, I can't believe this level of service on Sky Globe. This is outrageous." Other passengers murmured in agreement. The atmosphere in first class had shifted from privileged comfort to uncomfortable witness. "You should be more careful next time," Melissa told Eleanor, ignoring the rising tension in the cabin. "These things happen when people aren't used to the first-class environment." The comment was the final insult. An accusation disguised as advice, prejudice, masked as helpfulness. In that moment, as champagne continued to drip from her grandmother's ruined suit, Zara Washington made a decision that would ultimately reshape an entire industry. She tapped the live stream button on her social media app. Sky Globe Airways had just unwittingly cast itself as the villain in a viral story they couldn't control. And Eleanor Washington, who had built an empire by recognizing opportunity in adversity, exchanged a look with her granddaughter that contained a lifetime of understanding. The incident was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun. "Excuse me," Zara's voice cut through the tense silence, the phone in her hand still discreetly recording. "Did you just suggest my grandmother doesn't belong in first class?" All eyes turned to the young attorney as she rose from her seat. Unlike Eleanor, who had mastered the art of understated power, Zara stood with the confident posture of a woman who had never been taught to make herself small. "That's not what I said," Melissa replied, defensiveness creeping into her tone. "It was clearly an accident. An accident preceded by questioning her presence here, ignoring her requests for assistance, and followed by a comment about dark fabrics hiding stains." Zara enumerated precisely her legal training, evident in every syllable. "For clarity, I'm Zara Washington, Chief Legal Officer of Washington Enterprises and Civil Rights Attorney." Melissa's complexion paled slightly. "I'm simply trying to provide service to all our passengers." "Selective service, it appears," Eleanor observed, quietly dabbing at her suit with the napkins that Thomas Reed had provided. A rustle of movement announced the arrival of James Bailey, the head flight attendant, his expression cycling through confusion to alarm as he assessed the situation. "What seems to be the problem here?" he asked, his practiced customer service voice strained at the edges. "Your colleague spilled champagne on my grandmother after questioning her right to be seated in first class," Zara stated flatly. "This follows a pattern of ignoring her requests for assistance while promptly serving other passengers." James Bailey's eyes widened as he recognized Eleanor Washington. As a 20-year veteran of the airline industry, he knew exactly who she was and exactly what kind of power she wielded. "Miss Washington, I cannot apologize enough," he began, genuine distress in his voice. "This is absolutely not representative of Sky Globe standards. Please allow us to." "I'll need your employee's full name and identification number," Eleanor interrupted, her voice calm but brooking no argument. Melissa shifted uncomfortably. It was an accident. These things happen in turbulence. We're still at the gate, Thomas Reed pointed out from across the aisle. There hasn't been any turbulence. Other passengers had abandoned any pretense of not paying attention. Several had their phones out, capturing the unfolding scene. Eleanor Washington, a voice called from 3 rows back. The Eleanor Washington of Washington Enterprises. The whispers spread through first class like wildfire. Aviation portfolio worth billions. Rumored to be acquiring a major airline. Keynote speaker at the summit tomorrow. James Bailey's professional demeanor cracked further. Miss Parker, please assist in the main cabin while I handle this situation, he directed Melissa, whose expression had transformed from smug to uncertain. These people are always making mountains out of molehills, Melissa muttered, just loud enough to be heard as she turned away. Zara's phone captured every word. What exactly do you mean by these people, she called after Melissa. The cabin fell silent again, the question hanging in the air like a live grenade. I didn't. That's not what I. Melissa stammered, realizing too late the implication of her words. The aircraft's intercom crackled to life. Flight deck to cabin crew, what's the situation in first class? We've received reports of a disturbance. James Bailey grabbed the nearest handset. Minor service issue, Captain. Being resolved now. I'd hardly call racial discrimination minor, Thomas Reed remarked loudly. Eleanor finally stood champagne, still dripping from her suit. Mr. Bailey, I don't want meal vouchers or flight credits. Those are solutions for spilled drinks, not for systemic disrespect. I want accountability. Bailey nodded frantically. Of course, Miss Washington. I'll personally ensure this incident reaches our executive team immediately. That won't be necessary, Eleanor replied coolly. I'll be speaking with your CEO directly. I believe Derek Hamilton is expecting me in San Francisco this evening. The mention of the CEO's name sent another ripple of murmurs through the cabin. James Bailey's professional mask slipped completely, revealing naked panic. Sky Globe has been pursuing Washington Enterprises as a potential investor for months. Eleanor continued her voice, carrying just enough to be heard by those nearby. I was evaluating your company culture as part of my due diligence. This has been illuminating. A flight attendant rushed forward with a first-class amenity kit and additional napkins. Miss Washington, would you like to change before takeoff? We have a private area prepared, and I'm sure we can find something suitable. That would delay our departure, Eleanor observed. I'll remain as I am, so everyone can see exactly what happened here today. From her seat, Zara finished sending a series of rapid-fire texts to her network of civil rights activists, corporate contacts, and social media influencers. The video was already being edited with context and captions. By the time they reached cruising altitude, the incident would be spreading across the internet. This is just one moment, Eleanor told her granddaughter quietly as they retook their seats for takeoff. But moments like these have defined my entire life. The difference now is that I have the power to ensure consequences. As the engines roared to life and the aircraft began to push back from the gate, the cabin atmosphere remained charged with tension. James Bailey hovered anxiously at the edges of first class. Melissa had been banished to economy, and Eleanor Washington sat regally in her champagne-soaked suit, her dignity intact and her resolve hardening with every passing minute. Sky Globe Airways had no idea what was coming. The cabin lights dimmed as Sky Globe Flight 782 reached its cruising altitude of 35,000 feet. The champagne on Eleanor's suit had dried to a stiff, uncomfortable crust, but her posture remained impeccable. She hadn't sought to change or cover the stain. Every discolored patch served as visible evidence of the disrespect she'd endured. Across the aisle, Thomas Reed leaned over. Miss Washington, we've met before. Morgan Stanley, the Atlanta infrastructure financing deal in 2018. Eleanor nodded in recognition. Of course, Mr. Reed. You drove a hard bargain on those municipal bonds. I've followed your career with admiration, he continued. What happened today was inexcusable. I've already emailed a statement to your company offering to serve as a witness if needed." "Thank you," Eleanor replied. "I appreciate your integrity." The flight attendants had reorganized their service pattern. James Bailey now personally attended to the Washington women, while Melissa remained conspicuously absent from first class. The airline's damage control efforts were palpable but inadequate, like using a bandage to treat a hemorrhage. Eleanor turned to Zara, their voices low. "Update me." Zara's fingers swiped across her tablet screen. "The initial video clip has already hit 50,000 views, and it's accelerating. I've activated our response network. Civil rights organizations, corporate watchdogs, and aviation industry reporters are all over this. Number Eleanor Washington and number Sky Globe racism are trending in 3 markets. And our team. Marcus has pulled Sky Globe's complete investment portfolio and ownership structure. Legal is reviewing our options. PR has prepared 3 different response scenarios, depending on how the airline reacts." Zara's efficiency had always impressed Eleanor, even in crisis situations. "Good. Now show me what else you have." Zara hesitated, then passed her tablet to her grandmother. On screen was a compilation of complaints against Sky Globe Airways from the past 5 years, all involving discriminatory treatment of passengers of color, particularly in premium cabins. 27 documented incidents, Zara explained quietly. All settled privately with NDAs. No policy changes implemented. 3 involved the same flight attendant, Melissa Parker. Eleanor studied the data, her expression unchanged, but her mind calculating rapidly. "Pattern and practice," she murmured, using the legal terminology for systematic discrimination. "Exactly. This isn't an isolated incident. It's corporate culture." Zara retrieved her tablet. "The question is, what do we do about it?" Eleanor gazed out the window at the cloud formations below. Her reflection in the plexiglass showed a woman who had navigated far more treacherous conditions than this throughout her 7 decades. "Do you remember what I told you when you were 8 years old and that teacher said you were articulate?" Eleanor asked. Zara smiled slightly at the memory. "You said I had 2 options, educate the ignorant or outrank them. And now we have a 3rd option," Eleanor noted. "We can transform the environment that nurtures their ignorance." The conversation paused as James Bailey approached with fresh towels and a selection of beverages. His solicitousness couldn't mask his anxiety. "Miss Washington, our San Francisco team will have a full change of clothes waiting upon arrival. The airline would like to offer you complimentary first-class tickets to any destination." James. Eleanor interrupted gently. "May I call you James?" "Of course, ma'am. I built my first company when banks wouldn't lend to black women. I've closed deals while being the only person of color in boardrooms. I've outlasted critics, competitors, and economic downturns." Her voice remained conversational, almost friendly. "Do you really believe airline vouchers address what happened today?" James swallowed visibly. "No, ma'am. Thank you for your honesty. That's a starting point." After he retreated, Eleanor turned back to Zara. "Tell me about the legal approach." Zara outlined potential causes of action: discrimination in public accommodations, violation of civil rights statutes, breach of contract for premium service, intentional infliction of emotional distress. Her Harvard law training was evident in every precise analysis. "We could file immediately. The settlement value would be substantial," she concluded. Eleanor shook her head slightly. "Settlements bury problems under money. I'm more interested in excavating this issue completely." She closed her eyes, remembering earlier battles. The bank manager who refused to approve her first business loan until a white male colleague vouched for her. The real estate agent who couldn't find office space for her growing company until she sent a white employee to inquire. The potential clients who assumed she was the secretary rather than the CEO. Each memory strengthened her resolve. This wasn't just about one champagne spill or one prejudiced flight attendant. It was about changing the system that made such incidents routine. "We have 3 hours before landing," Eleanor said finally. "That's enough time to design something more impactful than a lawsuit." As the flight progressed, the two women meticulously crafted their strategy, weighing legal leverage against public pressure, calculating financial consequences against cultural change. They spoke in the shorthand developed through years of partnership, grandmother and granddaughter united in purpose, if different in approach. Occasionally, Eleanor's gaze drifted to the cockpit door. Beyond it, the pilot remained unaware that his aircraft carried not just a VIP, but a catalyst for transformation. At the San Francisco terminal, SkyGlobe CEO Derek Hamilton would be waiting with practiced smiles and corporate platitudes, equally unaware that the company he led was about to face its reckoning. Have you ever witnessed discrimination and wished you could do something about it? Comment 1 if you've seen someone stand up against prejudice in a public setting. Have you ever experienced poor treatment on an airline? Hit like and subscribe if you've ever wanted to see justice served when big companies mistreat customers. What would you do if you were in Eleanor's position? Would you pursue legal action, demand public accountability, or use your financial leverage to force change? Let's talk about it in the comments. Now, as our story continues, what do you think is about to unfold when this plane lands in San Francisco? Will SkyGlobe Airways recognize the gravity of their situation before it's too late, or is Eleanor Washington about to deliver a masterclass in consequence management? Fasten your seatbelts. This journey is about to encounter significant turbulence. The wheels of SkyGlobe Flight 782 touched down at San Francisco International Airport at precisely 2:17 p.m. Pacific Time. By 2:19 p.m., Zara Washington's carefully edited video had been shared 50,000 times. By 2:25 p.m., as the aircraft taxied to its gate number, SkyGlobe racism had become the top trending topic nationally. By 2:30 p.m., as passengers began to disembark, the airline's stock had dropped 3 points in a sudden, unexplained plunge that had analysts scrambling. Eleanor Washington remained in her seat as first class emptied her champagne-stained Armani suit, a badge of dignity rather than embarrassment. Zara stayed beside her, monitoring the exploding situation on her devices. CNN is running it, she murmured to her grandmother. MSNBC has reached out for an interview. The video has hit 2 million views. Eleanor nodded, unsurprised. And the airline, their social media team, posted a generic response about investigating the situation. They clearly don't understand the magnitude yet. James Bailey hovered nearby, his composure fraying as messages flooded his company phone. Miss Washington, there's a reception committee waiting at the gate for you. Our CEO, Derek Hamilton, has finally found time in his schedule for us. Eleanor finished. How convenient. As they finally rose to leave, Eleanor moved with the measured grace that had carried her through decades of business battles. The stains on her suit might as well have been medals of honor. She refused the flight attendant's offers of alternative routes through the terminal, choosing instead to walk the public concourse where her appearance would raise questions. The jetway revealed the first indicators of crisis. 4 SkyGlobe executives stood clustered at the gate, faces drawn with concern. Behind them, a phalanx of reporters had somehow assembled despite the short-notice cameras ready. Eleanor. Derek Hamilton stepped forward, hand extended. Tall, silver-haired, and impeccably dressed, the airline CEO had mastered the art of telegraphing authority. Today, however, his confident facade showed cracks. There's been an unfortunate incident. There's been a revealing incident, Eleanor corrected, not taking his hand. One that exposed the true character of your operation. Camera shutters clicked rapidly, capturing the confrontation and the obvious stain on Eleanor's suit. We should discuss this privately, Hamilton suggested, gesturing toward the nearby first-class lounge. Privacy benefits the perpetrator, not the victim, Eleanor replied, her voice carrying. Discrimination thrives in shadows, Derek. Reporters pressed closer, sensing a story bigger than they'd anticipated. Behind them, arriving passengers recognized Eleanor from the now viral video, pointing and whispering. SkyGlobe has a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination, Hamilton recited clearly, falling back on prepared talking points. The employee in question has been suspended pending investigation, and we're offering our sincere— Suspended, Zara interrupted, stepping forward. Your flight attendant questioned my grandmother's right to be in first class, deliberately spilled champagne on her, made racial insinuations, and she's merely suspended. More cameras appeared. Airport staff attempted to create order, but the scene had already escaped containment. Melissa Parker has been with Sky Globe for 9 years. Zara continued, her voice clear and measured. In that time, 3 formal complaints of discriminatory conduct have been filed against her. All were settled quietly. No disciplinary action was taken. Hamilton's expression flickered between shock and alarm. How did you? We did our due diligence, Eleanor stated. Something your airline clearly failed to do. A bold reporter called out from the crowd, Miss Washington, is it true you were considering investing in Sky Globe Airways? Eleanor turned to face the cameras directly. Washington Enterprises evaluates potential investments based on 3 criteria: financial performance, operational excellence, and corporate culture. Today revealed significant deficiencies in at least 2 of those areas. The implication landed with sledgehammer force. Hamilton's face drained of color as he calculated the financial impact of her words. Our partnership, he began, requires mutual respect, Eleanor finished. Something your employee found impossible to offer a 74-year-old black woman regardless of her accomplishments or resources. Zara stepped forward, the natural heir to her grandmother's authority. For decades, black travelers have endured microaggressions and outright discrimination on commercial airlines. Most victims lack the platform to demand accountability. My grandmother built Washington Enterprises from nothing, facing prejudice at every step. Today, she has the power to shine light on practices that most corporations prefer to hide. As if on cue, Zara's phone chimed with a notification. She checked it, then showed the screen to Eleanor, whose expression remained unchanged despite the significance of the message. What most people don't know, Eleanor announced to the assembled press, is that Washington Enterprises has been documenting instances of discrimination across the aviation industry for the past 18 months, preparing an industry-wide initiative to address these issues. Today's incident provides a compelling case study. This revelation shifted the story from a single incident to something much larger. Reporters began shouting questions simultaneously as Hamilton's executive team huddled in obvious panic. I'll be addressing these matters fully in tomorrow's keynote at the Global Aviation Summit, Eleanor concluded. Until then, I suggest Sky Globe's leadership consider whether their current approach to diversity reflects the values of their customers, employees, and potential investors. With perfect timing, a Washington Enterprises security team appeared, creating a path through the crowd toward the terminal exit. Eleanor walked through with characteristic dignity, Zara at her side capturing footage of the chaotic scene. Behind them, Derek Hamilton was already on his phone, likely calling an emergency board meeting. The Sky Globe executives scattered to manage various aspects of the unfolding crisis. And throughout the terminal, travelers watched the scene unfold on airport televisions, many of them recording and sharing content that would further amplify the story. In the executive car waiting curbside, Eleanor finally allowed herself a moment of relaxation. Your generation certainly knows how to create a firestorm, she remarked to Zara. We learned from watching yours fight battles with limited weapons, Zara replied, still monitoring the explosion of coverage. Sky Globe's stock is down 7% and falling. Their customer service lines are overwhelmed with calls. Competitors are already circling, promoting their diversity initiatives. Eleanor nodded, gazing out at the San Francisco skyline. When I started in business, our struggles remained invisible to the wider world. No viral videos, no instant accountability. Does it feel different? Zara asked, fighting in the open rather than behind closed doors. Eleanor considered this as their car navigated toward their hotel. Power has always been visibility, she finally said. The ability to be seen on your own terms. Today, we seized control of the narrative. At the Fairmont Hotel, staff were clearly expecting them, whisking them directly to the presidential suite without standard check-in procedures. Inside, a team of Washington Enterprises executives had already established a command center, monitoring the situation across multiple screens. Marcus Chen, Eleanor's chief strategy officer, greeted them with a tablet displaying real-time data. Sky globes in freefall. Their crisis response has been textbook inadequate. 3 board members have contacted us directly, distancing themselves from management's handling. Eleanor nodded. And the industry reaction? Mixed. Competitors smell blood. Industry organizations are drafting statements condemning discrimination while avoiding direct criticism of Sky Globe. The summit organizers have offered you extended speaking time tomorrow. As the team briefed her on developments, Eleanor removed her stained jacket for the first time, handing it to an assistant with instructions to preserve it exactly as it was. That suit would eventually hang in the Washington Enterprises Museum, marking a pivotal moment in corporate accountability. "What's our next move?" Zara asked, still energized from the confrontation. Eleanor settled into a chair overlooking the city, her expression thoughtful. "Now we wait. Let them scramble. Let them feel the pressure of public scrutiny and financial consequence. By morning, they'll be desperate for resolution. And if they're not, then Washington Enterprises will demonstrate what real leadership looks like," Eleanor replied. "Sometimes transformation requires external force." As evening fell over San Francisco, Sky Globe Airways executives gathered in emergency sessions, their comfortable world suddenly destabilized. What they couldn't know was that Eleanor Washington had been planning this moment of reckoning long before Melissa Parker spilled that fateful glass of champagne. The incident had merely accelerated a process already set in motion by a woman who had spent her lifetime converting obstacles into opportunities. The champagne stain would eventually fade. The impact of Eleanor Washington's response never would. The Sky Globe Airways corporate headquarters in Dallas hummed with frantic energy despite the late hour. Emergency lighting illuminated conference rooms that would normally be dark, revealing clusters of executives, lawyers, and public relations specialists huddled over laptops and phones. The crisis management team had been operating without breaks since the first video hit social media, their expressions growing increasingly grim as the situation spiraled beyond containment. In the main boardroom, CEO Derek Hamilton paced the perimeter while department heads delivered updates that ranged from concerning to catastrophic. Stock closed down 9%, reported Chief Financial Officer Lawrence Jenkins. After-hours trading suggests we'll open another 4 to 6 points down tomorrow. Institutional investors are calling for explanations. 2 hedge funds have already reduced their positions. Chief Marketing Officer Stephanie Warner followed with equally dire news. Social media metrics are off the charts, all negative. Traditional media has picked up the story on every major network. Our response statement has been labeled inadequate and tone-deaf. Competitors are subtly capitalizing on our vulnerability with targeted ads, emphasizing their diversity commitments. Cancellations, Hamilton asked, his voice hoarse from hours of crisis calls. Accelerating, confirmed the VP of Sales. Corporate accounts are particularly concerning. 4 major clients have suspended their contracts pending review, citing ethics clauses. The University of California system has announced they're reevaluating their relationship with us. Celebrity endorsers are distancing themselves on social media. The room fell silent as the chief legal officer cleared his throat. Beyond the immediate public relations damage, we're facing serious legal exposure. The pattern of complaints uncovered by Washington Enterprises could support a class action. We've identified 27 potentially similar incidents over the past 5 years, all settled individually with confidentiality agreements. How did they get that information? Hamilton demanded. Those settlements were sealed. They've been methodically building this case, the legal chief explained. Former employees' public records requests anonymous whistleblower accounts. Eleanor Washington didn't stumble into this situation, she was prepared for it. A junior executive entered with a tablet, whispering urgently to Hamilton. His face darkened as he took the device, reading its contents with growing alarm. Melissa Parker's father is Richard Parker, he announced to the room. The significance wasn't immediately apparent to everyone present, but those familiar with the company's governance structure recognized the implications immediately. Richard Parker sat on Sky Globe's board of directors. "Are you saying this flight attendant is a board member's daughter?" Stephanie Warner asked, connecting the dots. "The one who spilled champagne on Eleanor Washington." "Not just a board member," Hamilton clarified grimly. "Chair of the personnel committee that oversees our hiring practices and anti-discrimination policies." The revelation landed like a grenade in the already tense room. Several executives exchanged glances of disbelief. "That explains the previous complaints being buried," the chief legal officer realized aloud, "and why she's remained employed despite documented issues." "This isn't just a PR crisis anymore," Jenkins observed. "It's a governance failure with potential SEC implications. We're required to disclose conflicts of interest that could materially impact shareholder value." Hamilton braced himself against the conference table. "Has anyone reached Richard?" "He's not taking calls," his assistant reported. But he posted on his private social media defending his daughter, claiming she's being scapegoated by the woke mob. Several friends commented with similarly problematic statements. Stephanie Warner closed her eyes briefly in professional pain. "Tell me those posts aren't public." "They're restricted, but screenshots are already circulating." The crisis response team worked through the night, drafting and discarding various strategies. Each potential approach seemed inadequate against the perfect storm. They faced a sympathetic victim with enormous financial power, documented evidence of systematic issues, explosive social media momentum, and now the revelation of governance. Irregularities that transformed a single incident into an institutional failure. By dawn, Derek Hamilton had aged visibly. His normally immaculate appearance showed signs of strain: loosened tie, wrinkled shirt, the shadow of stubble on his jaw. As executives finally dispersed for quick showers and changes of clothes before the day's continued damage control, he remained alone in the boardroom, staring at the latest metrics. The customer service department had logged over 20,000 complaint calls. The reservation system showed cancellation rates 300% above normal. The employee forums were filled with flight attendants and ground staff reporting hostile interactions with passengers, demanding accountability. A soft knock interrupted his grim contemplation. "Derek," the voice belonged to Maria Gonzalez, Sky Globe's recently hired Chief Diversity Officer, a position created mainly for public relations purposes, with little actual authority or resources. "I've been reviewing the situation and have some thoughts." Hamilton had largely ignored Gonzalez's previous recommendations for substantive diversity initiatives, dismissing them as unnecessary costs. Now he gestured for her to continue with unexpected receptiveness. "This isn't just an isolated incident or a PR problem," she began. "It's a symptom of systemic issues we've left unaddressed despite numerous warnings. The nepotism with Melissa Parker's hiring and protection is just one example of broader governance problems. We need solutions, not analysis," Hamilton interrupted tersely. "The solution requires acknowledging the real problem," Gonzalez countered, with the confidence of someone who recognized a potential turning point. "Half measures won't work. Miss Washington clearly isn't interested in the usual playbook of private settlements and vague public statements. What are you suggesting?" "A complete overhaul. Transparent investigation of all discrimination complaints. Mandatory training with actual accountability metrics. Diverse recruitment with retention goals. And most importantly, governance reform that prevents conflicts like the Parker situation." Hamilton's expression revealed his resistance to such sweeping changes. The board might not have a choice," Gonzalez pointed out. "Washington Enterprises has the resources to sustain this pressure indefinitely. And according to our investor relations team, they've been quietly acquiring Sky Globe stock for months." This revelation jolted Hamilton from his fatigue. How much? Just under the reporting threshold. But combined with their influence over institutional investors and potential allies, they could effectively force changes through shareholder action if we don't address this properly. As the implications sank in Hamilton's phone signaled an incoming message. The blood drained from his face as he read it. Eleanor Washington just announced she'll be holding a press conference immediately following her keynote at the summit today, he reported. And she's invited former Sky Globe employees to share their experiences. Across San Francisco at the Global Aviation Summit, attendees were already buzzing with anticipation. The schedule showed Eleanor Washington's keynote had been extended and moved to the main hall to accommodate overwhelming interest. Industry leaders who had previously competed for her attention now wondered if they might be her next target. Throughout the crisis, Eleanor herself remained surprisingly inaccessible, declining all interview requests and issuing no statements beyond her brief comments at the airport. This strategic silence only amplified speculation about what she might say when she finally took the stage. Back in Dallas, as dawn broke over Sky Globe headquarters, the crisis team reconvened with reinforcements, crisis management consultants, diversity experts, and additional legal counsel. The mood had shifted from damage control to survival strategy. "We have approximately 4 hours before Miss Washington's keynote," Hamilton told the assembled team. 4 hours to develop a response that might save this airline from becoming a business school case study in how not to handle discrimination complaints. As they debated increasingly desperate options, no one noticed the janitorial staff member emptying trash bins in the corner, quietly capturing photos of confidential documents with a concealed phone. Within minutes, these images would join the growing body of evidence in Zara Washington's possession, revealing the airline's internal chaos and fumbling response. The noose was tightening, and Eleanor Washington hadn't even begun to pull the lever. The Global Aviation Summit's main hall had reached capacity an hour before Eleanor Washington was scheduled to speak. Industry leaders who normally sent representatives to such events had arrived in person. Journalists from publications that typically ignored aviation conferences had secured premium seats. The atmosphere crackled with anticipation, rarely seen at corporate gatherings. Backstage, Eleanor prepared with characteristic methodical calm. Her champagne-stained suit had been replaced by a striking cobalt blue ensemble that complemented her silver hair and projected authority. A small team of Washington Enterprises executives reviewed last-minute details while Zara monitored real-time developments on her devices. Sky Globe stock opened down another 12%, Zara reported. Trading volume indicates institutional investors are divesting. Their crisis team has been meeting continuously for 18 hours without announcing any substantive response. Eleanor nodded, adjusting her signature pearl earrings. "And our alternative investment target. Horizon Airlines board has unanimously approved preliminary discussions. Their CEO is in the audience today, third row center." A conference organizer appeared visibly nervous. "Miss Washington, we're ready whenever you are." The hall is beyond capacity. We've opened overflow rooms with video feeds, and there's a line around the building. "Thank you," Eleanor replied with a reassuring smile. "I won't keep them waiting." As she moved toward the stage entrance, Zara touched her grandmother's arm. "Are you sure about revealing the full initiative today? We'd planned a more gradual rollout." Eleanor's expression revealed the steel beneath her composed exterior. "When the moment presents itself, seize it completely. Your grandfather taught me that." The mention of her late husband, Zara's grandfather, who had supported Eleanor through the earliest and hardest years of building her empire, brought a moment of shared remembrance between the women. Then Eleanor straightened her shoulders and stepped onto the stage. The applause was thunderous, sustained almost reverential. Eleanor Washington approached the podium with measured steps, her presence commanding the massive space without apparent effort. She waited for the ovation to subside, surveying the audience with practiced poise. "Thank you," she began, her voice strong and clear. "I was scheduled to speak about innovation and investment opportunities in aviation. Recent events have persuaded me to address a more fundamental issue: who gets to fly with dignity in American skies?" A hushed anticipation fell over the audience. "Yesterday, while boarding a Sky Globe Airways flight, I was questioned about my right to sit in first class, ignored when requesting assistance, and ultimately had champagne spilled on my suit by a flight attendant who suggested that dark fabrics hide stains anyway." She paused, allowing the incident to resonate with the audience. I could discuss this as an isolated occurrence. I could frame it as poor customer service or individual bias, but that would obscure the systemic nature of discrimination in aviation discrimination, documented through hundreds of incidents involving passengers of color, particularly in premium cabins. Slides appeared on the massive screens behind her, displaying meticulously compiled statistics. For the past 18 months, Washington Enterprises has been conducting a comprehensive study of diversity, equity, and inclusion across the aviation industry. We've interviewed over 500 former and current employees from major carriers. We've documented passenger experiences through surveys and direct testimony. We've analyzed hiring, promotion, and passenger complaint patterns. The data continued to unfold behind her in compelling visualizations, airlines ranked by discrimination complaints, executive diversity percentages, settlement patterns. The results reveal an industry that talks about diversity in public while maintaining troubling patterns in practice. An industry where passengers of color are 17 times more likely to be questioned about their seating assignments, where flight attendants of color remain dramatically underrepresented in international premium cabins, where executive leadership remains 93% white despite serving increasingly diverse customer populations. In the audience, airline executives shifted uncomfortably as their company's specific metrics appeared. Derek Hamilton, who had flown in overnight from Dallas, sat rigid with tension as Sky Globe's particularly poor statistics were highlighted. This isn't about one airline or one incident, Eleanor continued. Though yesterday's experience provided a particularly clear illustration of the problem, this is about an industry that has failed to evolve its culture despite changing its marketing materials. She stepped away from the podium, moving across the stage with deliberate confidence. Today I'm announcing the formation of the Washington Initiative for Transportation Equity. With initial funding of $500 million, this program will support three primary objectives. The audience murmured in surprise at the figure. Even in the wealthy aviation industry, $500 million commanded attention. First, we will establish industry-wide standards for inclusive service backed by third-party certification and compliance monitoring. Second, we will create career development programs to increase diversity in leadership positions across aviation. And third, we will provide financial and technical support for airlines committed to meaningful transformation of their corporate cultures. Eleanor paused, her gaze sweeping across the audience. Additionally, Washington Enterprises is announcing its intention to acquire a controlling interest in Horizon Airlines, with plans to develop it into an industry leader for both service quality and inclusive practices. Gasps rippled through the hall. Horizon was Sky Globe's primary competitor in several key markets. The Horizon CEO, seated prominently as Zara had noted, allowed a small, satisfied smile to cross his face. This represents an initial investment of $3 billion capital that might have gone to other carriers had they demonstrated genuine commitment to equity and excellence. The message couldn't have been clearer. Discrimination wasn't just morally wrong, it was now financially disastrous. To launch this initiative, I've invited a panel of aviation professionals to share their experiences and insights. With perfect timing, 5 individuals walked onto the stage: former executives, flight attendants, and customer service representatives from major airlines, including Sky Globe. Their testimonies clearly rehearsed, but powerfully authentic, detailed patterns of discrimination that had been systematically dismissed or buried. Most devastating was the appearance of James Bailey, the Sky Globe head flight attendant from yesterday's incident, who had apparently resigned his position overnight to join Eleanor's cause. I've witnessed discriminatory treatment of passengers throughout my 20-year career, he testified. When we reported these incidents, we were told not to create problems or damage the brand. Yesterday's incident was the breaking point for me. Miss Washington deserved better. All passengers deserve better. As the panel concluded, Eleanor returned to the podium for her closing remarks. The hall remained absolutely silent, the audience stunned by both the scope of the revelations and the comprehensive response she had orchestrated. Some will call this an overreaction to a single unpleasant experience, she acknowledged. They misunderstand the nature of systemic problems. What happened yesterday wasn't exceptional. It was simply visible because of who I am. Thousands of passengers face similar treatment without the platform to demand accountability. Her voice grew even more resolute. In 1963, at age 12, I boarded a bus in segregated Alabama. The driver forced me to stand for 90 minutes rather than take an empty seat in the front section. 62 years later, I built an enterprise valued at billions of dollars. Yet I still board vehicles where my humanity is questioned. The personal revelation rare for the typically private executive landed with emotional force. This isn't about my comfort or convenience. It's about whether we truly believe in equal access to public accommodations. It's about whether corporate America means what it says about diversity and inclusion. It's about aligning practice with proclaimed values. She straightened to her full height, her presence filling the massive hall. Washington Enterprises is prepared to invest in airlines, demonstrating genuine commitment to transformation. We're equally prepared to support legal and regulatory action against those who resist. The choice belongs to industry leadership. As she stepped back from the podium, the applause began slowly, then built to a sustained ovation. Not from universal agreement, many executives remained frozen in their seats, but from recognition of a masterful power move executed flawlessly. Backstage, Zara waited with their team, monitoring the explosion of reactions across social media and financial markets. Sky Globe stock has been halted after falling 20%, she reported as Eleanor rejoined them. Their board has called an emergency session. 3 major institutional investors have publicly demanded leadership changes. Eleanor nodded, accepting a glass of water. And the initiative website, live and overloaded with traffic. We've already received 16 whistleblower submissions from airline employees, including 3 executives. 7 airlines have requested meetings about certification standards. A conference organizer approached nervously. Miss Washington, there's a sensitive situation. Sky Globe CEO Derek Hamilton is requesting a private meeting immediately. He seems desperate. Eleanor exchanged a meaningful glance with Zara. The next phase was beginning exactly as they had anticipated. "Tell Mr. Hamilton I'll see him in 30 minutes, she replied calmly. "After my press conference." As the organizer hurried away, Zara checked her phone again and smiled. Melissa Parker has been terminated effective immediately. The board member, her father, has been asked to resign. First steps, Eleanor observed, but meaningful ones. She rolled her shoulders slightly, the only indication of the emotional and physical toll of the past 24 hours. At 74, she had orchestrated a response that executives half her age couldn't have managed. The champagne incident hadn't merely been answered. It had been transformed into an industry-changing catalyst. "Are you ready for the next round?" Zara asked. Eleanor Washington straightened her already perfect posture. "I've been ready for 60 years. The Peninsula Hotel's executive conference room had been secured on short notice at considerable expense. Its mahogany table gleamed under discreet lighting, elegant flower arrangements softened the corporate atmosphere, and floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of San Francisco Bay. Under different circumstances, it would have been an ideal setting for high-level negotiations. Today, it felt like neutral territory for a surrender. Eleanor Washington sat at one end of the table, composed and regal in her cobalt blue suit. Zara occupied the chair to her right, an array of documents and devices organized precisely before her. 2 Washington Enterprises attorneys flanked them, while their security team maintained a discreet presence by the doors. At the opposite end, Sky Globe CEO Derek Hamilton projected forced confidence, despite his obvious exhaustion. The airline's chief legal officer sat beside him, along with a hastily assembled crisis management team. The empty chair that should have held Richard Parker, Melissa's father and board member, spoke volumes about the internal fractures already appearing in Sky Globe's leadership. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting." Eleanor Hamilton began his attempt at casual familiarity, falling flat in the charged atmosphere. "Miss Washington," she corrected mildly. "Let's maintain professional courtesy, Mr. Hamilton." The rebuke, though gentle, established the power dynamic immediately. Hamilton nodded, recalibrating. Miss Washington, I want to personally express my deepest regrets about yesterday's incident. It in no way reflects Sky Globe's values or standards. We've taken immediate action, terminating the employee involved, and Melissa Parker Zara interrupted. Let's use names, not euphemisms. Accountability begins with specificity. Hamilton paused, then continued with visible effort. Yes, Melissa Parker has been terminated. Her father, Richard Parker, has been asked to resign from our board, effective immediately. We're prepared to offer substantial compensation for the distress caused, along with a comprehensive review of our service policies. Eleanor studied him with the practiced assessment of someone who had evaluated countless executives across negotiating tables. You misunderstand the situation entirely, Mr. Hamilton. This isn't a settlement discussion. Then what? This is an assessment of whether Sky Globe Airways can be salvaged as a corporate entity. The bluntness of her statement silenced the room. Even Zara glanced at her grandmother, surprised by the directness of the approach. Hamilton's professional facade cracked slightly. With all due respect, Miss Washington, despite this unfortunate incident, Sky Globe remains a multi-billion-dollar carrier, with a stock that's lost 31% of its value in 24 hours, Eleanor interjected. Major corporate accounts suspending contracts, consumer boycotts gaining momentum, class action lawyers circling, and evidence of governance failures that would interest both the SEC and the Department of Transportation. The Sky Globe legal team exchanged worried glances. Hamilton's expression tightened. Evidence, he questioned. Zara opened a folder, sliding several documents across the polished table. Internal communications regarding previous discrimination complaints. Records of settlements with passengers of color who experienced similar treatment. Documentation of Melissa Parker's previous incidents, complete with notes about intervention from her father to prevent disciplinary action. The airline executives examined the papers with growing alarm. How did you obtain these internal records? The chief legal officer demanded. The question you should be asking, Eleanor observed calmly, is why your corporate culture is so corrupt that employees felt compelled to provide this documentation to us. People with conscience can only witness injustice for so long before they take action. Hamilton struggled to regain control of the meeting. Miss Washington, clearly there have been serious lapses in our procedures. We acknowledge that and are prepared to implement immediate reforms. But surely we can discuss this reasonably as business people without destroying a company that employs thousands. I've been reasonable for 74 years, Mr. Hamilton, Eleanor replied, her voice level but carrying unmistakable conviction. I was reasonable when banks denied me loans despite perfect qualifications. I was reasonable when real estate agents couldn't find office space for my growing company until I sent white employees to inquire. I was reasonable yesterday when your flight attendant treated me with contempt and poured champagne on my suit. She leaned forward slightly. Reasonableness has its limits. Sometimes transformation requires more forceful measures. The tension in the room was palpable when a commotion at the door interrupted the standoff. Richard Parker burst into the conference room, his face flushed with anger, ignoring the protests of both security teams. "This is outrageous," he shouted, glaring at Eleanor. "A witch hunt over a spilled drink. My daughter's career destroyed. My reputation tarnished." "Richard, this is not the time," Hamilton hissed, mortified by the board member's behavior. But Parker was beyond professional restraints. 30 years building this airline and we're supposed to surrender to social media pressure because someone got their feelings hurt. This is exactly what's wrong with corporate America today, bending over backwards to appease the woke mob. Eleanor remained perfectly still, her expression unchanged as Parker continued his tirade. Zara, however, had discreetly activated her phone's recording function, capturing every word. "My daughter did nothing wrong," Parker insisted, his voice rising. So she didn't recognize some old black woman as a VIP. That's hardly a firing offense. We've always handled these complaints quietly before. A voucher, a formal apology letter from customer relations, maybe a small settlement with an NDA. Problem solved. But now we're restructuring the entire company because the wrong person got offended. The Sky Globe legal team watched in horror as Parker effectively confirmed the systemic nature of the discrimination issues Eleanor had alleged. Hamilton appeared physically pained, knowing the damage being inflicted with every word. Mr. Parker, Eleanor finally spoke, her voice quiet but penetrating. Thank you for your honesty. You've just confirmed what we suspected. Sky Globe's leadership views racial discrimination as a public relations issue rather than a fundamental failure of corporate values and legal compliance. Parker finally seemed to register the implications of his outburst, his momentum faltering as he looked around the room. Your reaction, Eleanor continued, mirrors that of your daughter yesterday. When confronted with the consequences of discriminatory behavior, both of you responded not with reflection, but with outrage at being held accountable. She turned to Hamilton. This is why cosmetic changes are insufficient, Mr. Hamilton. The problem isn't one flight attendant or one board member. It's a culture that tolerates prejudice until it becomes publicly visible. The CEO knew he was witnessing the complete collapse of his company's negotiating position. Parker had just validated every accusation while being recorded footage that could easily join the growing media narrative around Sky Globe's practices. Richard Hamilton said quietly but firmly, I need you to leave now. Your presence is only making the situation worse. You're taking her side, Parker demanded incredulously. There are no sides here anymore, Hamilton replied, a note of resignation entering his voice. Only the reality we need to face. As security escorted the still protesting Parker from the room, a heavy silence descended. The confrontation had clarified what Eleanor Washington had understood from the beginning. Sky Globe's problems weren't isolated incidents, but symptoms of entrenched attitudes. Eleanor allowed the silence to stretch, knowing its psychological impact. Finally, she spoke with the measured cadence that had defined countless business negotiations throughout her career. Washington Enterprises sees two possible paths forward, Mr. Hamilton. The first involves our legal team filing discrimination complaints with the Department of Transportation, supporting the class action lawsuits already being prepared and using our influence with institutional investors to force a complete leadership overhaul through shareholder action. She paused, ensuring her next words received full attention. The second path is more constructive. Sky Globe implements a comprehensive transformation program under new leadership. Leadership we would help identify and support. The Washington Initiative provides resources and expertise for substantive cultural change, and the airline emerges as an industry leader in inclusive practices rather than a cautionary tale in business ethics courses. Hamilton looked physically diminished, the weight of the crisis evident in his posture. You're essentially proposing a takeover. I'm proposing salvation, Mr. Hamilton. There's a difference. With perfect timing, Zara's phone buzzed with a notification. She checked it, then slid the device toward her grandmother. The airline's stock had been halted again after another precipitous drop. Major shareholders were publicly calling for emergency board changes. The company's credit rating had been placed under review. Eleanor glanced at the information, then returned her attention to Hamilton. Your choice is rapidly becoming theoretical. Market forces may make the decision for you. The CEO conferred briefly with his team, their whispered exchange increasingly urgent. Finally, he straightened his shoulders and faced Eleanor directly. What would this transformation program involve specifically? It was the question Eleanor had been waiting for, the pivot point, where resistance transformed into reluctant cooperation. She nodded to Zara, who distributed prepared documents to everyone at the table. Complete leadership review with diversity as a core criterion for board and executive positions. Transparent investigation of all previous discrimination complaints. Revision of training protocols with measurable outcomes. Implementation of third-party compliance monitoring. Public commitment to industry-leading standards developed by the Washington Initiative. She delivered these points without reference to the documents having prepared for this moment long before the champagne incident that catalyzed it. And Sky Globe's current leadership, Hamilton asked already, suspecting the answer, would transition to advisory roles during implementation, then exit with appropriate severance once new leadership is established. Eleanor's tone made clear this wasn't negotiable. Hamilton stared at the documents, the culmination of a crisis that had evolved from a single incident to an existential threat in just 24 hours. The board will need to. Your board currently lacks quorum due to emergency resignations submitted in the past hour, Zara interjected, showing another notification on her phone. 3 members stepped down, citing personal reasons shortly after Mr. Parker's removal was announced. This information visibly stunned Hamilton, who had been in this meeting while his company's governance structure collapsed around him. Time is of essence, Mr. Hamilton, Eleanor said, her voice softening slightly for the first time. Not for my benefit, but for the thousands of Sky Globe employees whose livelihoods depend on the company's survival. In that moment, something shifted in Derek Hamilton's expression, a recognition that he was facing not an adversary seeking destruction, but a strategist who had calculated a path that might preserve something from the wreckage. I need 30 minutes to contact remaining board members, he said finally. Eleanor nodded. We'll wait. As Hamilton and his team stepped outside to make their calls, Zara turned to her grandmother with newfound appreciation. You never intended to destroy Sky Globe, she realized. This was always about transformation, not revenge. Destruction is easy, Eleanor replied, gazing out at the San Francisco skyline. Any fool with resources can tear something down. Building something better, that's the real challenge. For the first time since the champagne incident, she allowed herself a small smile. Besides, why waste a perfectly good airline when you can remake it instead? Their private moment was interrupted as Hamilton returned, his expression transformed by resignation and perhaps relief. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by the pragmatism of a corporate survivor. The remaining board members have authorized me to accept your proposal in principle, pending legal review of specific terms, he announced. Eleanor Washington extended her hand across the table. Then let's begin the real work, Mr. Hamilton. As they shook hands, a gesture that would be photographed for business publications worldwide, both recognized that this wasn't truly a negotiation between equals. It was the acknowledgement of a new reality, one where discrimination carried financial consequences that even the most profit-focused executives could no longer ignore. The champagne stain had set the transformation in motion, but Eleanor Washington's lifetime of strategic thinking had ensured the outcome would be far more significant than one airline's crisis response. An entire industry was about to change, whether it was ready or not. 6 months later, Eleanor Washington stood in the gleaming atrium of Sky Globe Airways' newly christened headquarters in Dallas. Sunlight streamed through the glass ceiling, illuminating the massive bronze sculpture that dominated the space, interlocking hands of different shades and sizes, reaching upward in a powerful symbol of unity and aspiration. The plaque at its base read, "Equal Dignity in the Skies," dedicated to those who transformed an industry. The transformation of Sky Globe had been more successful than even Eleanor had anticipated. Under her guidance as the new chairwoman of the board, the airline had implemented sweeping changes that rippled throughout the aviation sector. Today's ceremony would officially unveil not just a building but a reimagined corporate ethos that had already begun reshaping industry standards. Quite a difference from 6 months ago, observed Zara Washington, who had temporarily stepped away from her legal role to head Sky Globe's new Civil Rights Compliance Division. Remember that hotel conference room with Derek Hamilton? Eleanor smiled at the memory. He's adjusted remarkably well to his new advisory position. Some people rise to challenges when given no alternative. The former CEO had indeed surprised many by embracing his transitional role with unexpected grace. After the initial agreement, Hamilton had worked diligently to implement Eleanor's vision, perhaps recognizing that his legacy would be defined by how he handled the airline's transformation rather than the crisis that necessitated it. Around them, hundreds of guests circulated through the atrium. Industry executives, civil rights leaders, government officials, and Sky Globe employees selected from every level of the organization. The atmosphere hummed with energy and optimism that had been absent from the company for years. "Miss Washington." A familiar voice interrupted their conversation. James Bailey, the flight attendant who had witnessed the original champagne incident, approached with a confidence that hadn't been present during that fateful flight. Now serving as Director of Service Excellence, he had become an instrumental figure in redesigning customer experience protocols. "The ceremony will begin in 5 minutes," he informed them. "Everyone is in position." Eleanor nodded her appreciation. "Thank you, James. Your leadership has been invaluable these past months." "Speaking of unexpected transformations," Zara murmured, as Bailey moved away to coordinate with other staff. Indeed, many of Sky Globe's most enthusiastic change agents had emerged from unexpected corners of the organization, mid-level managers, frontline staff, and operations personnel who had long recognized problems but lacked the platform to address them. Eleanor had intentionally elevated these internal voices, believing that sustainable change required champions embedded throughout the corporate structure. As they moved toward the stage erected at one end of the atrium, Eleanor was stopped repeatedly by well-wishers and admirers. The respect she commanded had only increased during the transformation process, her methodical approach earning grudging admiration even from initial skeptics. The most remarkable encounter came just before they reached the stage. Melissa Parker, standing nervously in a conservative suit, clutching a portfolio. "Miss Washington," she began, her voice lacking the confident condescension from 6 months earlier. "I wanted to thank you personally for the opportunity to participate in the training program." Following her termination, Melissa had done something few expected. She had applied to the Diversity Education Initiative funded by the Washington Foundation. After completing the intensive program, she now worked under Zara's supervision, helping document and address discrimination complaints from passengers and employees. "Your perspective has been valuable to the program," Eleanor replied, with diplomatic grace. "Sometimes the most meaningful insights come from those who've had to reconsider their assumptions." Melissa nodded clearly, still uncomfortable but determined. "My father still won't speak to me," she admitted. "He says I betrayed the family by working with you." "Change often requires difficult choices," Eleanor observed. "The question is whether you believe in the work you're doing now." "I do," Melissa confirmed with surprising conviction. "I never saw myself clearly before. The program helped me recognize patterns I'd been taught my entire life." As she moved away to take her seat, Zara raised an eyebrow. "That remains the most unexpected development in this entire situation." "Not really," Eleanor countered. "Systems perpetuate prejudice, but individuals can change when given structured opportunity for reflection. That's why we invested in education alongside policy reforms." Their conversation paused as they took their places on stage. The ceremony was about to begin, marking the official unveiling of what industry analysts had already dubbed the Sky Globe Miracle, a corporate turnaround unprecedented in both speed and scope. Thomas Reed, the banker who had witnessed the original incident in first class, served as master of ceremonies. Now a member of Sky Globe's reformed board of directors, he had proven a valuable ally in securing financial community support for the airline's transformation. 6 months ago, a glass of champagne changed aviation forever. He began addressing the assembled crowd. Not because it was spilled, but because of who it was spilled on, and more importantly, how she responded. The audience's attention focused on Eleanor, who maintained her characteristic composure despite being the center of attention. Eleanor Washington could have pursued personal compensation. She could have simply taken her business elsewhere. Instead, she recognized an opportunity to address systemic issues that had plagued our industry for decades. Reed outlined the remarkable changes implemented under Eleanor's leadership. Executive diversity increased from 7% to 43%. Comprehensive training programs implemented across all service roles. Transparent complaint resolution systems with third-party oversight. Industry-leading accommodation policies for passengers with diverse needs. Most significantly, the company had established the Civil Rights Compliance Division with real authority and resources, a model now being adopted by competitors under pressure from investors and customers alike. The financial results speak for themselves. Reed continued gesturing toward a screen displaying key metrics. After an initial decline, Sky Globe stock has rebounded to record levels. Customer satisfaction scores have increased 37%. Employee retention has improved dramatically, reducing training costs and service inconsistencies. The message was clear. Diversity and inclusion weren't just moral imperatives, but sound business strategy. This revelation had transformed resistance into enthusiasm among even the most profit-focused stakeholders. When Eleanor finally took the podium, the applause was deafening, a stark contrast to the controlled response at the Aviation Summit 6 months earlier. Now, the admiration wasn't reluctant, but genuine, born of witnessing a master strategist at work. "Thank you," she began, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had become her trademark. What we celebrate today isn't a building or even a corporate transformation. We celebrate the possibility of aligning practice with principle, of creating spaces where dignity isn't determined by appearance or background. She surveyed the audience with measured confidence. 6 months ago, I stood before the aviation industry and described discrimination as a systemic problem requiring systemic solutions. Many viewed this as radical. Today, 7 major carriers have adopted the Washington Initiative standards. 19 have implemented similar compliance divisions, and regulatory agencies are considering new requirements based on our model. The statistics impressed even those familiar with the initiative's progress. What had begun as one company's crisis response had catalyzed industry-wide evolution. This transformation wasn't my accomplishment alone. Eleanor continued, acknowledging key contributors with characteristic generosity. It required courage from whistleblowers who provided documentation, commitment from employees who embraced difficult changes, and ultimately, wisdom from executives who recognized that meaningful reform offered a path to renewed success. She gestured toward former CEO Derek Hamilton, who nodded in acknowledgement from his seat. Their relationship had evolved from adversarial to collaborative, as he embraced his role in the airline's reinvention. Most importantly, Eleanor concluded this transformation required the collective voice of passengers who demanded better, who shared their experiences despite past dismissals, who supported companies making genuine progress while holding others accountable. As her speech concluded, the ceremony transitioned to its symbolic culmination. Eleanor and Zara, joined by a diverse group of employees representing every department and level of the organization, unveiled the official plaque, naming the headquarters after civil rights pioneers who had challenged transportation segregation throughout American history. The moment carried particular resonance for Eleanor, whose childhood memories included the Montgomery bus boycott and who had experienced segregated travel firsthand. Her journey from that reality to this podium represented not just personal achievement, but historic progress, incomplete but meaningful. After the ceremony, as guests moved toward the reception area, Eleanor and Zara took a private moment in the executive elevator. Grandma Zara said quietly, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if Melissa Parker hadn't spilled that champagne? If she'd just provided normal service?" Eleanor considered this counterfactual with her characteristic thoughtfulness. The Washington Initiative was already in development. We'd already documented the patterns and prepared our strategy. What Melissa Parker provided wasn't the cause, but the catalyst, the visible manifestation of invisible problems. She gazed out the elevator's glass wall at the transformed organization below. "In my experience, systemic change requires both preparation and opportunity. We had prepared meticulously. The champagne provided our opportunity." The elevator reached the executive floor, where a more intimate gathering of key figures awaited. Before the doors opened, Zara asked one final question. Was it worth it? All the tension, the confrontation, the publicity you've always avoided. Eleanor Washington straightened her perfectly tailored jacket, her dignity as unshakable now as it had been while champagne dripped from her ruined suit 6 months earlier. For decades, I navigated around obstacles, built success despite barriers, and accumulated influence through persistent excellence, she replied. But true power isn't measured by what you build for yourself. It's measured by what you transform for others. The elevator doors opened, revealing a reception where former flight attendants now served in executive positions, where diversity wasn't just represented but embedded in leadership structures, where the culture had been fundamentally reconstructed. "Look around," Eleanor told her granddaughter. A single moment of humiliation transformed into systemic change. That's not just worth it, it's the very purpose of power. 6 months after champagne had dripped from her expensive suit, Eleanor Washington boarded another Sky Globe flight, this time as the company's chairwoman. The service was impeccable, the atmosphere professional yet warm. No one questioned her presence in the premium cabin. No one expressed surprise at her authority. As the aircraft reached cruising altitude, she gazed out the window at the clouds below, thinking about the young girl who had once stood on a segregated bus in Alabama, dreaming of a day when her humanity would be unquestioned. That day hadn't fully arrived for everyone, much work remained. But Eleanor Washington had demonstrated what became possible when preparation met opportunity, when dignity demanded accountability, and when power was wielded not for retribution, but for transformation. The champagne served to her this time remained safely in its crystal glass, a symbol of service rather than disrespect. And across the industry, the ripples of change continued to spread, each carrier recognizing that diversity wasn't just a moral imperative, but a competitive advantage in an increasingly conscious marketplace. The incident that began with humiliation had concluded with historic change, and that Eleanor Washington knew was the greatest victory of all. Eleanor Washington's story teaches us that true power comes from transforming individual injustice into collective progress. When faced with discrimination, she didn't just seek personal redress, she created systemic change. This demonstrates that our response to prejudice defines its ultimate impact. While most victims lack Eleanor's resources, her strategic approach offers universal lessons. First, document everything. Evidence transforms personal grievances into compelling cases. Second, recognize the difference between incidents and patterns. Eleanor understood her experience reflected broader issues requiring broader solutions. Third, use whatever leverage you possess, whether financial, social, or moral, to demand accountability beyond superficial apologies. Most importantly, Eleanor shows us that dignity isn't granted by others, but maintained through our responses to indignity. She remained composed even as champagne dripped from her suit, knowing her ultimate response would be more powerful than any immediate reaction. The story also reveals how discrimination often persists because it remains profitable, or at least not costly, until someone with power forces financial consequences. Eleanor's masterstroke was connecting diversity directly to business performance, transforming moral imperatives into market advantages. In our own lives, we may not share multinational corporations, but we all possess the capacity to transform moments of humiliation into opportunities for meaningful change. Have you ever witnessed or experienced discrimination and wished you had the power to create real change? What would you have done in Eleanor's position? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of turning racism into a catalyst for transformation resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful narratives that explore how individuals can overcome systemic barriers. Did Eleanor's strategic approach inspire you? Tag someone who embodies that same dignified resilience in the face of prejudice. Your support helps us continue sharing these important stories that challenge us to think differently about power, prejudice, and progress. Thank you for joining our community of thoughtful viewers committed to understanding and addressing racism through powerful storytelling. Together, we can transform individual moments of injustice into movements for lasting change.